Even in today's world, women often handle more of the household and child-rearing duties than their partners, even when the women are also working full-time. Research consistently shows that a balance in family duties and balance in a relationship as a whole fosters a healthy relationship and a happier household. Balance is possible, but it takes lots of TLC and effort.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Even in today's world, women often handle more of the household and child-rearing duties than their partners, even when they're also working full-time. Research consistently shows that a balance in family duties and in a relationship as a whole fosters a healthy partnership and a happier household. Creating balance is possible, but it takes TLC and effort. Today, we'll focus on this real-life question. My husband is a good provider, but not so great in many other ways. I work full-time, manage the house, and care for our two kids. I'm burnt out and angry. How can I get him to step up? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Tim J. Myers, senior lecturer at Santa Clara University in Silicon Valley. And Tim is an amazing man who focuses on the power of domestically committed fathers. This is a fascinating, fabulous, and much needed topic. So welcome to the podcast, Tim. I am so excited to share time with you.
Thank you so much for having me. We had such a wonderful interview previously. I just was looking forward to this, and I am just so behind what you are doing. And I especially like that you're emphasizing that this part of family life and gender roles in America right now and around the world is absolutely crucial. I don't know if it gets as much press as it should, Dr. Manley. So anyway, you're doing that, and I think that's wonderful.
Thank you. And I think the power of podcasts and conversations like this is we get to bring, people forward who really believe in a topic that we can all learn from and grow from, because life is imperfect. We're imperfect. Moms are imperfect. Dads are imperfect. And the more support we can give, the more positive messaging we can give in a world that's so filled with what's going wrong. So let's talk about what we can make go right.
Exactly.
And before we launch into that, if you'd share just a little bit about what makes you you.
Well, I suppose part of that could be background. I'm the oldest of 11 children in a super Catholic family, grew up in Colorado Springs. I also happen to have met an amazing woman who has been my wife now. We have been married for, I think we're at 50 years right now.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
she has influenced me, and vice versa. She'll admit under duress more than I could ever. I couldn't even begin to quantify, much less be grateful enough for what she has taught me. And I'm very much a Western American, and I'm very much I'm a teacher, but I'm also very much an artist, and that's at the heart of who I am.
I just love that. And I know you and I were having a little bit of a conversation that, a few of your guiding parts in life are love, family, art, story, and spirituality. What a message. What a strong, powerful message and words to live by. Love, family, art, story, spirituality. I could talk to you for hours about each one of those.
I'm sure we could.
So let's go into the topic of today, domestically committed fathers and the power in a world where, I think it's in some ways become men versus women, one gender against another. And when I'm a real believer, I love women, I love men, I love people, no matter what gender somebody is, right? And when we really communicate and pitch in to create healthy families. We are making, as you say, the world a better place. I'm pulling words from something you had, written to me. And could you talk us through, especially when we go back to this listener's question? And I do have to say, it's not a question that I'm unfamiliar with. So
Right.
many women and sometimes men, I have to say, talk to me or send me an email saying, this is my situation. I am bearing the burden of everything except maybe one piece here or one piece there. How can we get a partner to step up?
And that is just, that is a vital question. In my book, at some point, I have an Ashanti proverb, which says something along the lines, I'm thinking I'm going to get it pretty close. The ruin of a nation begins in the homes of the people. Now, that's a negative way of saying it. The positive way is that the fruition, the health of a nation also begins in the homes of the people, begins in families. And I think what we have to do before we do anything else is look at how we got where we are. We are living in a time, and this isn't true all over the world, and there are many forces in the world that are reactionary and want to go backwards. But we're living in a time when there's been tremendous social and other progress. And sometimes that's lost in the glare of all the technological process or progress and the rest of it, the digital revolution. So I was born in 1953. I grew up in a thoroughly traditional sexist family. And again, a big family, as I said. My mom
11.
was, yes. And my mom was the home person. My dad was the world person, the work out there. And like the person who wrote that, the woman who wrote that letter to you or email said, my husband is a good provider. My father was an amazing provider with almost no domestic commitment whatsoever. And of course, my mom and dad were acting according to the templates of their time. Well, along comes the 60s, and suddenly the rug gets pulled out from under them, which as I've gotten older, I've been more understanding of what they went through, which I'm mentioning to Dr. Manley, because I think that's another. I love what you said about loving all the genders and all variations on gender, because this is a problem we're all in. It can be seen as men versus women, and sometimes it is. I mean, there has been and still is tremendous sexism, but the solution is all of us getting together in our values and the way society is structured. And my point is, when women started going back to work or going to work in huge numbers in the 70s in the United States, we suddenly created a new society that we had no apparatus for.
Mm-hmm.
Society is still set up today in 2023 to largely be set up for, and this is nobody's fault, I mean, this is just the way it evolved, to have a woman home full-time in the home with the kids and the man out there in the work world. Now, by the way, that doesn't reflect our reality at all. But you'll notice I mean, you can see this in the smallest things. What do two working parents, by the way, there are plenty of people, and I was one of them, who don't have two working parents. For a time, my wife and I were big on somebody always being home. That's a choice. Not everybody has to do that. But I stayed home with my sons for over a year. Then I stayed home with my daughter from the day she was born till kindergarten. So there are people who have one, either the woman or the man, or whoever, because we're talking about other kinds of families too. One of the spouses is staying home doing the domestic thing, the other one's out in the world. So I'm not ignoring those people, and everybody gets to choose that. But what we have is a lot of families, we have two working parents. And one little thing that comes up that shows us how we are not set up for this: what happens when your kid gets sick?
Mm-hmm.
When your kid gets sick, it throws families into like this giant, we got to cover, what to do this, or who's going to do this, I got to take off work, I'm going to, I mean, you can see that was not a problem before because you had one domestically committed spouse, and that was his or her, usually her province. So
Absolutely.
this is how we got to where we are today. We are still trying to work out, and you'll see all kinds of things like family leave, parental leave, also including for fathers. Daycare is a big part of this. We're trying to catch up in the way society is structured to the actual majority reality of two working parents. But boy, this is still a work in progress, and it's causing that kind of strain. My heart goes out to the woman who contacted you, because that is an unbelievable burden, and I can't imagine the churning in her heart day by day as she tries to deal with that.
Absolutely. And that's why I thought it was a perfect question to bring forward here, because you can feel that pain of the person who's working, where partners are working full time, or, one is working from home, whatever it is. And the child is sick, especially if we're both working outside the home, right? And then they have to send the kid to school sick. So the little kiddo goes to school sick, but they feel badly about that, but they don't have a choice because they don't have daycare and they can barely make ends meet or whatever's happening, or they have a big day in court, if they're in whatever is happening. And so it leaves often the partner who's shouldering that big responsibility, building up all of this resentment, and also often feeling like a nag, like, hey, partner,
Right.
will you help me? Partner, please help
Right.
me. And the other partner who probably grew up with the same template, in their upbringing, which is, hey, this person does the breadwinning and brings home the bacon, and the other person, just because you happen to be a certain, gender, then it all falls to you to cook, to clean, to pick up the dry cleaning, to take the kids to
Exactly.
soccer. And you can see how this imbalance, no wonder relationships ultimately dissolve in many cases. It's not
That's
that
right.
there's a problem with marriage, because people always say, well, the problem is because
Right.
you're
Right.
married. No, the problem is not because you're married. That just happens to be the statistic we have. We don't have statistic for partnerships that aren't registered. It's about any relationship
That's
where
right.
there isn't a balance in financially, emotionally, mentally, physically, all of these, the child rearing. So, again, so thank you for setting the backdrop for us. How can we help break out of these traditional templates, these traditional models that are so hardwired into us, into the psyche and the other thing is many women just pick up the slack. I know that I'm
Oh,
certainly
absolutely.
one of those where I'll just willingly let someone, not pick up their part maybe as much as I ought to, and just go back into what my mom modeled for me, which was being that nurturer and that caregiver. And not that that's bad. It feels really good to me to be
Right.
nurturing and caring,
Right.
but the imbalance can come at a cost.
Right. And we're talking about, and you're referring to this obviously too. I'm not saying something new here, but we're talking not only about that pain that that spouse is feeling, but we're talking about injustice. We're talking about a feeling that this isn't fair, which, by the way, is a very traditional idea. Sharing the work is not an untraditional idea. It's just that we've shared it in certain ways. And just to throw in one more big picture thing, and I think I'm trying to get to that answer about how we deal with this in a practical sense. This is a beautiful example of how the personal can be political. I don't mean to overstate that. I think some people take that way too far. But what happens in individual families right now, because of this giant societal change, it is a big political reflection. And you referenced, I think, very wisely, that there's a lot of generalized anger. It can be women versus men. It can be wives versus husbands. And if we look at questions of financial security, it gets the further down you go, the worse it gets for people who are living in poverty or close to poverty or whatever. These pressures become just overwhelming. So part of this thing is we've got a lot of bad feeling going on for very understandable reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we start? Well, I think at the heart of this has to be this whole thing. I like the fact that you used it, how deeply this is ingrained in our psyche, how much this has to do with gender roles and how we learn those. And of course, a lot of what we learn about gender roles, we learn more from modeling than from being taught. I mean, they are often taught, but we see what our parents or guardians were like, and we tend to identify with our same gender, same sex parent. And, that kind of thing runs pretty deep. And like you said, you slip back into that thing where you're reflecting your mom, and that is not bad. I've been a caregiver. That nurturing, that giving is one of the most beautiful things in the world. I sometimes see there's even a conflict between working mothers and stay-at-home mothers. And I was actually in a group when my daughter was little where our kids would meet to play. And I saw that conflict among some of those women. I was like, no, you can't be against each other. Everybody gets to choose. But
Yes.
again, part of this thing with gender is this choice. The more we understand basic, and when I say feminism here, I don't mean necessarily radical feminism, although there are things radical feminism had to teach us that were very important. I mean, day by day, garden variety. Hey, let's do what's fair in this marriage. Let's do what's fair.
Okay,
So
can we pause here? Can you
absolutely.
just say that one more time in capitals? Let's do what's fair. It's so
Let's do
common sense, right? But please
exactly.
let me hear you say it again.
Let's just do what's fair. And I love that you would emphasize that point. I often say that I'm very much a liberal, progressive kind of person. I'm not I'm not against other points of view necessarily. Some of them I'm very much against, but one of my big points is the world that we're trying to create with all these progressive changes is actually based on common decency. If there's a person who's a different type of person from you, you should respond to them with common courtesy and decency and respect. And so we're applying that here too. If both parents are working, now obviously too, this can differ, and spouses have to work this out together. It can be that you have one person, and this happens regularly. You have one person in a high-powered job that brings in a whole lot of money, and the other person is in a low-pressure job that brings in less money. Well, okay, I'm perfectly open to negotiation in that either way. Okay, I'll do more of the domestic work because your job has got these aspects to it. But that still has to be 100% agreed and negotiated between the two partners. What we're tending to see, and like you said, we still have these statistics that show when two parents are working, men still tend to do less of the work at home. Now, it's bad enough that that happens with housework. It is absolutely unacceptable when it happens with parenting. Because, and again, I don't want to push this point about the two parents of opposite genders thing too much, because some people are using that as a mallet to hit other people over the head with. But basically, we know that if children who have more committed guardians or parents, those kids do better in life. And my point, and here's a big one, and this is partly the answer to what you were asking before, Dr. Manley. My point, and the point of my book, Glad to Be Dad, is we need to sell men on the benefits of this. A lot of men don't understand the benefits, or they're living at a distance from the benefits of being a domestically committed father. And the benefits to the man I'm talking about, to me, my kids are going to get amazing things out of it. My wife is going to get amazing things out of it, but I'm also getting amazing things out of it. And that's one of the reasons my book was full of a lot of stories, the funny things that happen, the moving, precious moments that you have as a parent, how it helps take you out of this old Herb Goldberg book, The Male in Harness, who's, by the way, which is another gender role, right? The male in harness who spends his entire life pulling the plow, how to step out of that sometimes and be able to be your fuller self. You mentioned love, family, spirituality, art, I'm like, that's just being human. That shouldn't be a professional orientation for somebody like me. These are the things that are around us, that are in the air and in ourselves. And again, I think a lot of men are longing for more of that, but they don't necessarily know how to do it. And I think we all get caught up in money and the daily routine. I think a lot of it is money and the daily routine. Like you said, it's easier to pick up after somebody sometimes, because if you run the risk of being called a nag, but it's also just more work in your day. Oh, he threw his clothes on the floor. He could have done this with them. I'm just going to let it go. Why? Because I'm busy. I've got to shop. I got to go to work. I got this. I got that. Money and the daily routine they slow us down.
They absolutely do. And our society has become so materialistic, money oriented. Not that it's not important to have money. We need money so that we
Exactly.
can survive. But I do think our values sometimes get a bit out of whack. So I have a question for you. I have tons of questions for you, but I really love how you pointed out the piece about agreements and how we need to negotiate agreements. And the reason my ears really perked up at that, I was going to ask you about it anyway, and here you gave it to me. In my next book that's coming out in 2024, it's called The Joy of Imperfect Love. I talk
Beautiful.
about commitments and how commitments are made either explicitly or implicitly in every
Mm-hmm.
relationship. We make
Mm-hmm.
commitments, we make agreements. So even when we're dating, we decide who's paying for dinner. Is it shared? We're deciding once we move in together who's doing the dishes, who's doing. So we're creating, and these are often implicit agreements.
Right. Right.
So we're not, and so what I really propose and bring forward strongly, because it's who I am, I was getting people to sign agreements with me back when I was 7 years old and realized I couldn't trust my dad to follow through. So if he'd make me a promise, I learned pretty early on, I need to have him sign this, right? And so not that we need our partners to sign agreements. I mean, if we can create trust, then they don't need to be.
Right.
But what do you think? And so I'm really much, you and I haven't talked about this before, so I just love that you brought it up. I think it is such a powerful way, not only to create harmony and balance in a relationship, but if we look at the agreements as signs that the agreement is needed because something is awry. So, for example, for the person who's working full time, picking up the kids from school or whatever activities, tending to all the appointments, and the other person is merely going to work and coming home and then retreating, doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
If you're creating agreement and you see in black and white, wait a minute, this is the disparity, this is the imbalance. Going back to your point, just be fair. When we see, wait, honey, all I'm asking you to do is pick up doing the shopping or making 5 meals a week, and then also overseeing the cleaning or the homework, and you can actually see as you negotiate that agreement, you can say, wow, that was really lopsided. Do I want to be a person who is that unfair to my partner? Do I feel good about me if I'm just sitting back and letting my partner, the person I say I love? What do you think? You can tell I get really passionate about this topic. What do you think about that?
I think you're absolutely right to be passionate about that topic. Again, there's a huge injustice. Sometimes that injustice is unconscious. Sometimes it's half conscious. And there are some guys in the world who are just using women. There are women who use men too. It's not like that never happens, but
of course.
I mean, and I think your point about how implicit this is also a critical one. So, and I'll give you an example of this, how bad it can get. When my book first came out, and some people read it, and I got a lot of strokes. It's like, oh, you're this wonderful husband. You're this, and my wife said one time, and I could not have agreed with her more. She said, why are you getting praise for doing your half of the job, and all the women who are doing the job and have been doing it all along aren't getting? But suddenly it's like, oh, this man who's liberated or whatever, what a wonderful guy. I couldn't agree with my wife more. I was like, what? I do my half of the work and suddenly I'm a hero? No, doesn't make sense.
Your wife is a wise woman.
Oh, she is
and
very.
Kudos to you for doing and being such a great role model. But I do like her point. That was smart woman.
Yeah, it's like, this is just fair, right? And again, I think that's where a lot of this tension builds up. And there are a lot of other things in the culture, by the way. I don't mean to keep going back to this larger picture, but a lot of things in the culture that aren't even necessarily completely related to marriage and other domestic relationships or romantic relationships are also causing a lot of tension among genders and different forms of sexual orientation, people in different groups and all that. And I think this is actually good at its heart because we are changing. I think this is like one of those things where women are saying and should say, this isn't right. This isn't working. I love what you said about, am I really treating the person I love, am I treating that person right? It can happen on a day-to-day basis in simple habits that you may never question. Again, your point about it being implicit. So the other side of this is this whole application of feminism. I actually think we need another word for that, although I love the word feminism, don't get me wrong. I keep trying to come up with something like anti-rigid genderism or anti-genderism, whatever, but men are also very much trapped. Many men are very much trapped in narrow gender roles too, narrow and fruitless gender roles. So
wait a second,
part of
I have an idea. Sorry, just back to your word. How about fairism? Using your word.
That's actually great. Yeah.
A gender neutral term, because if we are just going back to, your principle of let's just be fair, fairism.
Absolutely right.
And that is about if we create equality regardless, without pulling down one gender or another, there's no reason to pull people down.
That's right. That's right.
But so anyway, I had to say that.
No, it's perfect.
I think you came up with fairism is let's go with that for now.
I think that's great. And I'll give you an example of the kind of thing too, how much I had to learn about this too, because when you see an injustice, a big systemic injustice, what the first thing you see is one group is exploiting another. And there's no question that for centuries, in various ways, in different cultures and all that, males have been exploiting females. There's no question about it. So that starts to change, right? But then you also start to see that a lot of times the oppressor is caught up in this cycle like the oppressed is caught up in the cycle. The oppressor is also being hurt by the cycle. Now, it's not like, men dominating and exploiting women, men got all kinds of things out of that. Men got the ability, for example, to live the life they want and do more what they want out there in the world, while the woman picks up the slack. And you think of somebody like Gauguin, the amazing French painter, who ran off to the South Pacific, by the way, had affairs with women, and got a sexually transmitted disease.
Yes.
I can't remember. While his wife is at home taking care of the kids, doing all his work as an artist, all this, I mean, so men got something out of that, but they also lost so much. And this is again my point about how we have to understand how men are socialized and how men take on these roles, how they don't see the benefit to themselves in actually doing this fair. So
can I pause you
please,
for a
please,
second?
of course you can.
Sorry.
And by the way, Dr. Manley, don't ever hesitate. I'm from a very Irish side of my family. I just go 90 miles an hour.
It's just that you say so
anytime.
many things that are like my heart just gets such joy from, and I
Wonderful.
want to lean into it.
Please.
And I think the piece that I don't want our listeners to miss, because it's like giving my heart great joy to hear you say it, that your book, Glad to Be Dad, even though a male or whoever is the power figure in the relationship, whoever holds more of the, they get more of the benefit, so to speak.
Right.
I think we forget that when someone is misusing or abusing another person, or exploiting another person, even though they may seem like they're the winner, and this is the piece you're talking about that we really want to pause at, they're losing. They may be winning in some way, but I want to just focus on how that person loses, because they're losing their dignity. They're losing their respect. They're losing their ability to create balance and compromise and be a team player and be a good role model and go to their, we all die someday, and go to their grave knowing, hey, I was a good human being. I was a fair human being. I was a just human being. I used my life to learn, to grow, to become better. Yeah, I'm imperfect, but I spent my life becoming more and more an evolved human being. And that to me is just a piece you're hitting on that I don't want to lose. That when anyone steps up to the plate, back to the question that was sent in, when anyone steps up to the plate, they are becoming a better human being, and thus a better role model, and thus creating a better world.
And making themselves happier.
Yes.
Which is something they may not see. And again, I'm thinking about the woman who contacted you, and I'm thinking about practical things to say to her, as I'm hoping we're getting closer to those things. And it's sometimes hard to come up with the specifics that you actually do, but conceptualizing the whole thing, and what you just said is perfect. This is a much broader context. And in fact, in my opinion, when we talk about it in those terms, we're talking about the spiritual. However people define the spiritual, the way you live your life in terms of trying to make yourself better, a better world, to give, to create more fruitfulness, that to me is it's a question of values so deep that they become at least philosophical, but in my opinion, certainly spiritual. So, and you think about that. Well, I'll give you one example too. All of this stuff is tied up together, right? So a huge part of this is the way our views of parenting have also changed. So again, I was a kid at the time. My parents worked their tails off for us, and I have nothing but gratitude and thanks to them. But they were old-time parents. You didn't really talk to kids. And especially if you got 11 kids, I mean, what are you going to do, right? You didn't really talk to kids. They were there. You provided for them. And my parents did all kinds of things to provide for us. But now I can remember my dad saying one time, well, you know what they say it all is now? It's psychology. And he said it was like a dirty word, right? Because this was this big change. I think one of the things, and a colleague of mine, a wonderful colleague of mine once said, we've talked about this a lot. He said, I realized from watching you and your wife that I've made one assumption that is false. He said, my idea was that my wife would raise them and I would be working. He was a wonderful, loving father, don't get me wrong, but I would start to have a strong relationship with them when they grew up. He says, I thought what I would do is backload. my parenting. And he said, what I realized from watching you and your wife is I need to front load. And so this is this whole thing that with attachment theory and all of these things that modern psychology has shown us, we know that babies in the womb, they can't understand language in the usual sense, but they start picking up language. We know that these early childhood literacy and language experiences are incredibly important in what that child is going to be throughout life. And not only in terms of their literacy skills, but in terms of their reasoning skills, how they're going to do in school. So I think part of the things was that a lot of men are missing out of, because that old model puts the man outside of the home when they're young, or he's not with them as much. They're missing this incredible relationship with a human being that they can have from the beginning, that they can affect. I mean, my wife and I, we're teachers. My wife's a reading specialist. We'll say, you can raise your kid so that your kid will have, in virtually every situation, academic success if you know how to bring language play, learning, not in the sense of the way teachers learn, sit down and learn this, but the way kids learn through playing, through singing, through talking, through games, and all the rest of it. You can virtually assure academic success for them, not to mention a profoundly deepened, rich relationship with those kids. I think many men, and there's a song about it, Dr. Manley, Harry Chapin, Cats in the Cradle. I think many men have that moment where it's later in life and they're like, why don't I have a better relationship with my son or daughter? And I'm saying, if you want to be a farmer, get out in the fields when the crops are planted.
And thank you for reminding us of that song. Listeners, if you don't know that song, the father has no time for the child when the child is small. And then as the father ages and he wants to have a relationship with the son says, gosh, Dad, a little bit too busy, just can't do it for you. And almost an exact parroting of, or maybe the exact parroting, but that Harry Chapin, was that Harry Chapin?
Harry Chapin, yeah.
Harry Chapin, Cats in the Cradle. So I want to pause here and really dive back in to the listener's question, because I can feel, like, okay, give us some tips, give us some tools. And I think we've already laid some out. You've done a brilliant job with it. So here's what I'm taking from what you're saying. Hey, if there's an imbalance in your relationship, first off, sit down and really maybe write out where the imbalance is so you can see it, feel it, get it down on paper, whether it's paper or on the computer. Get it down, get it out of your psyche, get it down on paper so you can see the imbalance. Then create a negotiation, a negotiation with your partner and say, here's the lopsidedness. Let's negotiate about creating more balance here. Create an agreement. Then you're also asking, I love how you said, look at your views, look at your values, so to speak. So maybe it's also a couple of big conversations about what are our values here? Is value, we all have values. Some people value money first on their list. Some people value success. Some people value family, love, relationship. Let's get our values down as partners and look at our values. And it's okay to have, from my experience, and I write about this in my work, in my books, but it's okay to have some slight mismatch in values. But if one person values money and success as number one, and the other person values family as number one, but the first person who values money and success has family down at a 6, that's not going to work out very well. So we really need to see, and ideally we do this before we're, have kids and in relationships. But if we haven't done that, it's never too late. Remember, we're all imperfect. So maybe it's about, let's look and talk as partners about our values, our views, getting them into alignment if possible. Sometimes they might need some psychotherapy, which I'm a big fan of, right? Or bibliotherapy, pulling in some good self-help books. And then the other thing that I think you're really talking about, that I'm hearing you say, is in all of these conversations and in your interactions, be curious. Be curious about your partner's background. Like, hey, is this an unconscious template that you have? And just this unconscious, you're following in your dad's or your mom's footsteps. Can we make things a little more conscious? And talk about them? And of course, those discussions can be a little anxiety inducing for people who aren't used to having them. But learn to have those conversations about that tough material in a calm, very careful, very thoughtful way. It sounds like you and your wife do that naturally. So what do those all sound like tips you could stand behind for this listener or
They
this
do.
okay.
They do. I want to add just one short thing and one longer thing. I would be really false and inaccurate if I gave the impression that my wife and I always have these conversations amid sweetness and light and complete lack of disagreement. We have had our arguments and our fights like anybody else. That's what I love your emphasis on imperfect love. But it is absolutely true that we have said from the beginning in our relationship that talking to each other was the heart of everything we are. So what I want to do is say, I love those steps. I just want to go back and I think there might be a step. If I was doing it, I would insert another step before that.
Please.
I think it is one of the miracles of the world that all these things we're talking about, which are practical issues of family, home, job, work-life balance, which inform the entire economy, not to mention the political unit, of the United States, all these things come down to what is usually, not always, a romantic sexual relationship between two people. So at the heart of a family, I mean, people get married for different reasons. I'm not saying that one size fits all. It's not for me to tell everybody in the world what marriage should be. And marriage has been very many different things throughout history. Some people get married for security and comfort. Some people get married for political, all this stuff. But our tendency in the West is to believe now, and this is being questioned, in sexual romantic love as the heart of that relationship. So the first thing I would do, again, I don't know that woman who contacted you. I don't know what the details are there. So I'm just speaking very generally. The first thing I would do is look at my relationship with my spouse in terms of that part of it. How close and emotionally warm are we with each other right now? That is something that can so easily get lost. It takes a beating every day. If you've got two working people with kids, it takes a beating every day. Mom and dad and their romance gets pushed to the back burner, right? That is something that has to be worked at, maintained, and considered. Because if that part isn't working, all those anxieties, and those can be challenging conversations. Like you said, if that part's not working, those things are going to be much harder to do. After that, so in other words, one of the things I would do is I'd say, let's get a babysitter. What movie do you feel? Let's just do this. I would try to reestablish that if, which may well be the case, it has been broken or it's been, weakened in some way. Secondly, the conversations I would start are about, and this is why I started with this big picture stuff. Wow, this isn't necessarily our fault. We're here in a world that we were given where we're under these pressures, like to be a double working couple with kids in an age where that's really difficult, and to talk about that. Because one of the things I want to do is establish with my partner, we're on the same team. We're working together. I really care about you. In fact, I love you to distraction. And I want to establish that before we start having the conversations. Now, that doesn't mean that those conversations don't have to happen. I mean, I think that's got to be, this is unfair to so many women. And I love the point you made earlier, Dr. Manley. It is unfair for a woman to be considered a nag because she's asking for fairness in her marital relationship. So she's going to have to talk to him about that. But if she starts talking about, look, this is the world we inherited. And that's where you bring in, as you wisely said just a moment ago, what's your family? What did you get from your family? There's this Jewish proverb I just love. When two people get married, 6 people jump into bed together.
So true. So true. So true.
And when people first hear that, sometimes they go, what are you talking? Is this an orgy? I'm like, no, that's not the point. We're talking about your marriage is utterly saturated with your parents and his or her parents. They're going to be there at your elbow invisibly every second. So those conversations starting about who are we as a couple and let's celebrate us. And then, wow, what kind of world do we inherit or we're trying to deal with? And what did we get from our immediate families? That seems to me like it might lead very naturally into those wonderful specific conversations you're talking about, such as what are our values? What do we value? Because once you clarify those values, and this is exactly what you said, I love the way you said this, and you started by talking about these things are implicit. You said, make this conscious. Every anti-oppression movement has a stage that we call consciousness raising. You have to help people understand, guess what? We're doing something here that's not fair. Me Too movement. Guess what? This stuff is still going on. It's not fair.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, Tim, I could keep us going for another 45 minutes times 8. So I so appreciate all of the tips. I feel like we've given this question, this topic, at least a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there's so much more to explore, including, all of the roots of where this came from, these
Right.
mindsets came from that are so entrenched in us and in our society. Well, things have changed, so many of our core beliefs have not changed. So
Right.
we're getting used to this. I'm also a believer in your attitude of, hey, there's no blame here. There's no shame here. Let's not start from that place in our relationships. It's not about blame or shame. It's about understanding. The last
Right.
piece I want to say, I love that you brought up the teamwork thing, because especially in my next book, The Joy of Imperfect Love, I coined this phrase, and listeners are going to hear it over and over again. Last. If you want your relationship to last, LAST, both partners need to listen. That's the L. Attune comes from, right? That parenting, that attuned parenting, attachment. So we want to listen. We want to attune, really dive into connecting with someone. We want to see the other partner, not project onto them. We want to
No.
see them and
Right.
know them. And the T is teamwork. So we have LAST, listen, attune, see, and teamwork. And so if we can start really bringing those forward in relationships, in our imperfect ways, we can really solve some of these imbalances.
That's exactly right.
Oh my
And when
goodness.
and I love last. I think that's perfect. And by the way, what you have done there is describe love that is not merely passive. It's a love that is active. It's a
Absolute
love that
active.
it's a love that glows in a relationship and causes two people to turn toward each other and, like you said, to keep going deep. Now, obviously, everybody wants that. I mean, if there's somebody in this world who doesn't want that in a relationship, I don't know who they are. But like you said, you have to do these things. You have to work at it. You have to value it so much that you put your own labor and time into it.
Oh my goodness. You are just such a joy. You have so much wisdom to share, Tim. I am so grateful. And your book, as we wind up, tell listeners where they can find you, where they can find your book, Glad to Be Dad. Tell us just how people can access more of this richness that you're giving to us.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your kind words. I reflect them right back on you. Glad to Be Dad is all over the usual places. Powell's Books, on Amazon. It's all over the place. My website, tmyerstorysong.com. I'm Tim J. Myers if you're looking for me, because Tim Myers is a pretty generic name. My website's getting old. I'm going to have a new one fairly soon here. But yeah, you can find it in the usual places. It's out there. You can look it up easily. So it's on the website, and my website has links where you can get it. Yeah. By the way, I want to emphasize too, in my book, I do a fair amount of talking like we've been talking today about the social situation, all the rest of it. But a lot of it, most of it is stories of family life, like being wakened up at 3 a.m. by the alarm that my 2-year-old set. I mean, it's about the real life of being a
Real
parent.
life.
Yeah.
And stories, we learn so well through stories often.
Mm.
Okay, so Tim Myers Story Song. Listeners, it's Tim, Timj, Myers,
MYE,
Meyers.
sorry.
I'm sorry,
Sorry. We spelled it the weird
M-Y.
way. Yeah.
Myers, Tim, Myers, storysong.com. Again, and when they're looking for you, it's Tim Myers storysong.com, not Tim J. Myers story song.
Right. Tim J. Myers I had to do later.
Okay.
The
And
age
so,
of searchability.
yes, so thank you. And remember his wonderful book. Give us one more shout out with the title, Tim.
Glad to Be Dad.
Glad to Be Dad. And a wrap up quote that I wanted to offer listeners that comes from Tim is simple and so poignant. Fathers can play such a huge role in making a better world. So thanks, Tim, so much for being with us today. It has been truly a joy, a pleasure, and a privilege.
Thank you, Dr. Manley. Right back at you. I just so enjoy talking to you.
I adore it. Take good care.
Take care.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.